In the grim darkness of the far future, there are fates worse than death. You might think the greatest horror in Warhammer 40k would be falling to chaos, being consumed by Tyranids, or facing the cold certainty of extinction at the hands of the Necrons. But there exists a horror so profound, so utterly alien to everything that makes a creature what it is, that even in a galaxy drowning in suffering, it stands apart as uniquely terrible. This is the fate of the orc who wakes up hardwired into a death dread. To understand why this fate is so horrifying, you must first understand what an orc is, not what humans think orcs are. Not what the scared soldiers of the Imperial Guard whisper about in their barracks, but what they truly are at their core. Because only when you comprehend the fundamental nature of orcish existence can you begin to grasp the magnitude of what is stripped away when one of these creatures is bolted into a walking tomb of screaming metal and becomes something that their own kind calls a death dread. This is not a story about honor or sacrifice. This is not a tale of warriors preserved to serve a higher purpose. This is the story of what happens when the happiest creatures in the galaxy have their very essence ripped away and replaced with an existence of perpetual torment. This is the story of a curse that keeps on giving, day after agonizing day, for as long as the rusty mechanisms continue to function and the tortured greenskin within refuses to die. Let us descend into this nightmare together and witness what it truly means to trade everything that makes you alive for raw killing power, wrapped in a prison you can never escape. The nature of the orc joy made flesh. Before we can understand the horror, we must understand what is lost. To be an orc is to exist in a state that other species can barely comprehend, a state of pure, uncomplicated joy. Even the Eldar, who have witnessed the birth and death of gods, who have seen their civilization fall into eternal damnation, acknowledge this truth. Euthan the Perverse, an Eldar farseer, once made an observation that cuts to the very heart of what orcs are. He said that orcs are the pinnacle of creation, that for them, the great struggle is won. They have evolved a society which knows no stress, no angst. Who are the elder to judge them, the Eldar who have failed? Who are humans to look down upon them? Humans on the road to ruin in their turn. The farseer asked why these other races suffer so much, and his answer was chilling in its simplicity. Because they sought answers to questions that an orc would never even bother to ask. The Eldar and humans see orc culture as crude and despise it, but perhaps the crudeness is not weakness. Perhaps it is the ultimate victory. Orcs were created over 60 million years ago, during the legendary war in heaven, engineered by the mysterious beings known as the Old Ones, whom the orcs call the Brain Boys. These ancient architects of life created the orcs as the ultimate warriors and survivors, designed to battle the Necrons and the Khitan in a war that would reshape the galaxy. Their ancestors, the Krork, were towering, brutal fighters who stood alongside the Eldari as servant races to powers that have long since faded into myth and legend. After the Old Ones fell and their grand design crumbled into dust, the orcs devolved into smaller, roadier, and even more aggressive forms. But what they lost in size and sophistication, they retained in other ways. They kept their incredible resilience, their fundamental aggression, and their instinctive knowledge of warfare. Most importantly, they retained something that makes them unique among all the intelligent species of the galaxy. They retained the ability to be genuinely, profoundly happy. To understand an orc is to understand a creature whose entire biology, psychology, and culture are oriented toward a single purpose, and that purpose brings them nothing but joy. Orcs love fighting above all else. This is not hyperbole or exaggeration. This is the foundational truth of their existence. They do not fight because they must, or because they are compelled, or because their survival depends on it. Though all these things are true. They fight because fighting makes them happy in a way that other species can barely conceive. Imagine waking up each day, knowing exactly what you were meant to do, knowing it with such certainty that doubt never enters your mind. Imagine that the thing you were meant to do is also the thing that brings you the greatest possible joy. Imagine that you are surrounded by others who share this purpose, who understand you completely without need for complex explanation, who will fight beside you with the same uncomplicated enthusiasm you feel. This is what it means to be an orc. When an orc charges into battle, when he feels the weight of a chopper in his hand and hears the roar of his fellow boys around him, when the WH energy flows through him like electricity through copper wire, he experiences something approaching transcendence. Not the transcendence of meditation or spiritual enlightenment, but the transcendence of purpose perfectly fulfilled. He is doing exactly what he was born to do, and it feels magnificent. The biological reality of orcs supports this psychological truth in ways both obvious and subtle. Orcs are not simply biological creatures in the way humans or elder are. They are a fusion of animal and fungus, a symbiotic merger that grants them capabilities far beyond what either component could achieve alone. Their green skin is not just camouflage or coincidence. It contains chlorophyll, allowing them to photosynthesize, to draw energy directly from light itself. This means an orc can survive in conditions that would starve other warriors, can fight longer and harder, because his very biology is feeding him even as he battles. Their blood carries countless distinct fungal organisms, along with trace elements of copper and carbon. This gives orc blood a green hue and also contributes to their remarkable healing abilities. Orcs can survive injuries that would kill other species outright, their bodies knitting themselves back together through the same resilient growth that allows fungus to thrive in the harshest environments. They regenerate lost tissue, recover from wounds that would cripple others, and seem to grow tougher with each injury they survive. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of orc biology is how they reproduce. Orcs do not mate, do not raise children, do not worry about the next generation or the future of their species. They reproduce through spores released throughout their lives, but especially at the moment of death. These spores fall to the ground, burrow into soil or onto surfaces, and begin the orcoid life cycle anew. First come the squigs, the small fungal creatures that serve 1,000 purposes in orc society. Then the snotlings, who cultivate the squigs and the fungus. Then Gretchen, the small greenskins who build settlements and perform menial labor. And finally, the orcs themselves emerge, full of genetic knowledge and ready to fight. This means wherever orcs go, they leave behind the seeds of future invasions. A planet that successfully repels an orc attack will, decades or even centuries later, find itself facing new orc tribes that rose from the spores left behind by the original invaders. It makes orcs nearly impossible to truly eradicate, and it means they never have to worry about the survival of their race. They simply exist, fight, die, and in dying ensure more orcs will come after them. Beyond their physical attributes, orcs possess something even more extraordinary. They generate a gestalt psychic field known as the WH, and this field is central to understanding everything about how orcs function and what makes them happy. The WH is not just psychic energy in the abstract sense. It is belief made manifest, expectation turned into reality, collective will reshaping the physical universe to match orcish assumptions about how things should work. Every orc generates this field, and it grows stronger as orcs enjoy themselves, which generally happens while fighting. The more orcs gather in one place, the more powerful the field becomes, and the more reality begins to bend toward orcish expectations. This is why orc technology works despite appearing to be nothing but scrap metal held together with wishful thinking and excessive amounts of rivets. When enough orcs believe a pile of junk will function as a vehicle, when they paint it red because red ones go faster, the WH field makes it so. This psychic gestalt serves another crucial function. It allows orcs to instinctively recognize who is bigger, and therefore who is in charge. Size matters in orc society because orcs never stop growing. An orc who survives many battles, who proves his worth again and again, grows larger and tougher. The respect of other orcs produces an effect similar to adolescence in human males. The orc puts on muscle, becomes more aggressive and assertive, and generally throws his weight around. If he wins the ensuing challenges, he may become a nob, a leader of orcs, noticeably larger and tougher than the average boys. The truly successful orcs Those who survive for years or decades can grow to enormous size. They become warbosses or even warlords, and when they call for a WH, other orcs flock to them from across entire star systems. These great migrations are part crusade, part pub crawl, with liberal amounts of genocide thrown in for good measure. Millions of orcs unite under a powerful leader, their collective enthusiasm generating a tidal wave of psychic energy that makes their already formidable capabilities even more devastating. During a proper WH, reality itself seems to bend around the orcs. Their ramshackle machines work better, their shots land more often, their charges hit harder. The bigger the WH grows, the more orcs are drawn to it, and the more powerful it becomes in a feedback loop that can sweep away entire civilizations. Whole planetary systems can be exterminated before the orcs finally run out of enemies and turn on each other, disbanding the WH through internecine warfare until another strong leader emerges to start the cycle anew. This is what it means to be an orc. To be part of something greater than yourself without losing yourself in the process. To know exactly what you were made for and to love doing it. To be surrounded by others who understand you without need for complex social rituals or psychological games. To grow bigger and stronger the more successful you are, with no upper limit except death itself. To live in a society that values the things you are naturally good at, being loud, being violent, being crude and direct and uncomplicated. Orcs do not worry about the future. They do not question the meaning of existence. They do not suffer from existential dread or spiritual malaise. They wake up, they fight, they eat. They drink fungus beer until it turns into another fight, and they are happy. When they die in the midst of battle, doing what they love most. And they believe their souls go to the Great Green, an endless afterlife of eternal battle, where the fighting never stops and the fun never ends. Even their gods reflect this uncomplicated joy. Gork and Mork, the twin deities of the orcs, are not complex pantheons demanding elaborate rituals or philosophical understanding. Gork is brutally cunning, Mork is cunningly brutal, and that is all an orc needs to know. They stomp, they fight, they embody everything an orc aspires to be. And they do it with an enthusiasm that makes even divine combat seem like the best possible way to spend eternity. To be an orc, then, is to exist in a state of perpetual contentment, punctuated by moments of explosive joy. It is to be exactly what you were designed to be, and to love every minute of it. It is to have no regrets, no doubts, no fears except the fear that the fighting might end before you have had your fill. It is to be, in a very real sense, the happiest creatures in the galaxy. Now, keep all of this in mind. Hold on to this understanding of what an orc is, what drives him, what makes him happy, what gives his existence meaning and purpose. Because we are about to explore what happens when all of that is taken away. We are about to witness what occurs when an orc trades his joy, his freedom, his very orkiness for the promise of power. We are about to see why becoming a Death Dread pilot is a fate that even in a galaxy full of horrors stands out as uniquely terrible. The Death Dread, a promise of power, the Orc Death Dread, which is Orc shorthand for Death Dreadnought, stands as a monument to the Greenskins' peculiar understanding of what constitutes an acceptable trade. It is a large combat walker, somewhere between the smaller killer cans piloted by Gretchen and the massive stumpers that tower over the battlefield like mobile fortresses. The machine is smaller than a stumper, but considerably larger than a can, capable of carrying up to 4 weaponized arms bristling with guns, saws, and crushing claws. From the outside, to other orcs, a Death Dread represents everything desirable in orc culture magnified to thunderous proportions. It is big, loud, and incredibly destructive. It stomps across the battlefield with earth-shaking force, its weapons creating a storm of firepower that can reduce infantry to red paste and punch through armored vehicles with equal ease. When a Death Dread wades into combat, it becomes a focal point of the WH energy, a walking avatar of orcish might that inspires nearby boys to fight even harder. Other orcs love Death Dreads because they embody the core values of orc culture taken to their logical extreme. The immense destructive capacity, the large number of weapons, the tendency to simply stomp things to death, All of this lies at the very heart of what defines orc civilization. A deaf dread in full rampage is a sight that fills lesser orcs with admiration and envy. It represents power, status, and the ability to crump anything that needs crumping with overwhelming force. So when a big mech announces that he has the materials and expertise to construct a deaf dread, there is never a shortage of volunteers. Orcs line up for the chance to become one of the biggest and most powerful members of their clan. They see the machine and imagine themselves inside it. Imagine the weight of 4 massive weapons as their arms. Imagine the power of hydraulic legs that can crush skulls like overripe fruit. They imagine themselves becoming something greater than they currently are. Something that other orcs will look up to quite literally, given the deaf dread's superior height. What they fail to imagine, what they cannot truly comprehend until it is far too late, is the price they will pay for that power. They do not understand that the deaf dread's pilot must be permanently hardwired into the machine. They think, in their simple orcish way, that being inside such a wonderful instrument of destruction will be even better than using regular weapons. They think bigger is always better, and louder is always more fun, and more Dakar is the solution to every problem. They are catastrophically, tragically wrong. The construction of a functional deaf dread requires the combined expertise of both a mech boy and a pain boy. This collaboration is essential because the pilot is not simply seated inside the machine with controls to operate it. The pilot becomes part of the machine in the most literal and irreversible sense. The mech boy handles the mechanical aspects, building the walker's frame, installing its weapon systems, ensuring the hydraulics and engines function properly, or at least function in the way orc technology functions, which is to say barely and with tremendous noise. The pain boy handles the biological component, the grisly surgery that will transform an orc into a deaf dread pilot. Pain boys are the orc equivalent of surgeons and dentists, and they are driven to perform exploratory surgery on living creatures just as mech boys are driven to fiddle with machinery. They are devious, deranged, and usually covered in gore from head to toe. They are a menace to friend and foe alike. Their chief passions are surgery and extreme dentistry, the latter often carried out during the former, since teeth are a commonly accepted form of payment for their services. Pain boys learn their craft through a mixture of genetic memory, trial and error, and the orc concept of knowing stuff. Their greatest joy comes from conducting experiments, and in many ways this makes pain boys the biological equivalent of mech boys. Just like mech boys, pain boys are often accompanied by grot orderlies who aid them in their surgeries and other menial tasks. Just like mech boys, they operate on instinct as much as knowledge, driven by urges they do not fully understand to cut and stitch and modify in ways that should not work but somehow do. An orc will only go to a pain boy when he has no other choice, as these odd boys are infamous for trying out experimental procedures on patients while they are under anesthesia. Squig brain transplants, unnecessary limb replacements, cybernetic modifications that were never requested, all of these are standard hazards of visiting a pain boy. Most orcs would rather let their natural resilience handle an injury than risk what a pain boy might do while they are unconscious on the operating slab. But becoming a deaf dread pilot requires more than a simple visit to the doc. It requires undergoing a procedure so invasive, so permanent, so thoroughly transformative that it makes regular pain boy surgery look gentle by comparison. The orc who volunteers does not fully understand what he is agreeing to. He sees the deaf dread and wants to be inside it, wants to become it, wants the power it represents. He does not think about the details. He does not ask careful questions about the process. Orcs do not work that way. They see something they want, and they go for it with the same uncomplicated enthusiasm they bring to everything else. The volunteer is selected, either through lottery, if there are multiple candidates, or through simple assertion of dominance, if the orc in question is big enough to intimidate potential rivals. He is brought to the pain boy's workshop, surrounded by the smell of blood and machine oil, filled with the sounds of grots scurrying about and tools clattering on metal surfaces. The deaf dread waits, its armored shell open like a mouth ready to swallow him whole. And then the surgery begins. The surgery, where the horror begins, installing a pilot into a deaf dread, involves a procedure that, while not unlike the process used to create a space marine dreadnought, is far messier and more primitive in its execution, where the Adeptus Mechanicus approaches the interment of a space marine with religious reverence and precise technical expertise. Employing centuries of accumulated knowledge and sophisticated medical equipment, the orcs approach it with the same brutal enthusiasm they bring to everything else. The pain boy does not use anesthesia in the way other species would understand it. Orc anesthesia typically consists of hitting the patient very hard on the head until he stops moving, or possibly administering some concoction of fungal extracts and squig venom that may or may not actually reduce pain, but definitely makes the patient confused enough not to complain effectively. The orc volunteer, if he is lucky, loses consciousness early in the process. If he is unlucky, he remains partially aware throughout the entire procedure, experiencing every cut, every penetration, every moment of the transformation. The pain boy begins with the spinal column, using tools that look like they were designed for completely different purposes and possibly stolen from other species entirely. He exposes the orc's spine and begins implanting neural interfaces directly into the nervous tissue. These are not the carefully calibrated neural links of more advanced civilizations. They are crude metal plugs, wires, and connectors that the mech boy assured the pain boy would probably work. They are driven into the spinal cord with force, penetrating the protective layers of tissue and embedding themselves in the neural pathways that carry signals from brain to body. Each implant sends waves of pain through the volunteer's body, or would if his pain receptors were not already overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the assault. The orc nervous system is robust, capable of handling tremendous damage, but even orc physiology has limits. The volunteer's body convulses, muscles spasming as foreign objects interrupt the normal flow of electrical signals that allow him to move and feel. Next comes the brain itself. The pain boy cuts through the thick skull with a saw that screams and chatters, filling the air with the smell of burning bone and the spray of green blood. Once the cranium is opened, exposing the orc's brain to air and light for the first time since he emerged from his fungal womb, the real work begins. Cranial jacks are hammered into place, driven through brain tissue with the same delicacy one might use to install rivets in sheet metal. These jacks will serve as the primary interface between the orc's consciousness and the deaf dread systems. They penetrate deep into the brain, seeking out the areas responsible for motor control, sensory processing, and higher cognitive function. The pain boy has an instinctive understanding of where these jacks need to go, the same way a mech boy instinctively knows how to assemble a gun from a pile of scrap. This does not mean the process is gentle or precise. It means the pain boy jams the connectors in roughly the right location and figures the orc's natural resilience will handle the details. Nerve probes follow, threaded through brain tissue like wires through a wall. These probes will carry sensory information from the deaf dread's systems to the pilot's brain, allowing him to see through optical sensors, feel through pressure sensors, and theoretically control the machine as though it were his own body. In practice, the translation is imperfect at best. Human nerve signals do not map cleanly onto mechanical systems, and orc nerve signals are even less compatible. But the WH field helps bridge the gap, allowing the impossible to become merely improbable. Throughout this process, the pain boy is assisted by grots who hand him tools, hold back bleeding tissue, and occasionally have to dodge when the volunteer's involuntary movements threaten to sweep them off their feet. The grots chitter and squeak, commenting on the procedure in their high-pitched voices, placing bets on whether the volunteer will survive or if the pain boy will have to start over with a fresh candidate. The mech boy works alongside the pain boy, installing the mechanical components that will interface with the biological ones. Tubes are inserted that will handle waste elimination, as the pilot will never leave the deaf dread again and bodily functions must still be managed. Nutrient feeds are implanted that will deliver sustenance directly into the bloodstream, bypassing the need for eating in the traditional sense. Stimulant injectors are positioned near major arteries, ready to flood the pilot's system with combat drugs when battle begins. Life support systems are the next consideration. The Def Dread is a sealed environment, and the pilot will need air, temperature regulation, and protection from the external environment. The mechboy installs a breathing apparatus that forces oxygen into the pilot's lungs. A crude mechanical wheezing system that will become the rhythm of his existence. Cooling systems are added to prevent the pilot from cooking inside his metal shell, though these systems are famously unreliable, and the interior of a Def Dread is known to become hot enough to blister exposed skin. More tubes follow. Tubes for monitoring vital signs, tubes for delivering medications, tubes whose purpose even the mechboy is not entirely sure about, but which looked important, so he installed them anyway. The volunteer's body becomes a nest of cables and hoses, each one penetrating his flesh at some point, each one binding him more thoroughly to the machine that will become his prison. The actual placement of the orc into the Def Dread sarcophagus comes next. The volunteer, now more resembling a grotesque fusion of meat and metal than a proper orc, is lifted by several grots and positioned inside the armored shell. His mutilated body is secured with restraints, preventing movement that might disconnect the delicate or not so delicate connections. The remaining systems are hooked up, each connection another chain binding him to his new existence. Finally, the mechboy begins the process of permanent installation. Welds are applied, sealing the sarcophagus shut. Bolts are tightened, making removal impossible without destroying the entire assembly. The volunteer is no longer an orc who has been placed inside a machine. He is now a component of the machine itself, as integral to its function as the engine or weapons systems. The Def Dread is welded shut with its pilot inside, a permanent fusion of flesh and metal that will persist until one or both components fail catastrophically. During all of this, if the volunteer is conscious, he experiences a growing sense of wrongness that his orcish mind struggles to process. He feels his body being cut, penetrated, modified in ways that should not be possible. He feels the foreign objects being driven into his spine and brain. He feels the tubes being inserted, the connections being made, the metal shell closing around him like a coffin, and he begins, perhaps for the first time in his life, to feel something orcs rarely experience. He feels fear. But by this point, it is far too late. The process cannot be reversed. The volunteer cannot change his mind and climb out of the Def Dread. The machine has been welded shut. The connections have been made permanent. The surgery is complete. All that remains is to activate the systems and see if the volunteer survives to become a pilot, or if the painboy will need to scrape out a corpse and start over with a new candidate. The mechboy throws the activation switch. Power flows through circuits, feeding into the neural interfaces, shocking the pilot's brain into connection with the machine's systems. And the volunteer, if he has survived this far, experiences his first moments of consciousness as a Def Dread pilot. This is where the true horror begins. The awakening. First moments in hell, the first sensation is noise. Not the comfortable roar of a WH or the joyful cacophony of battle, but a mechanical screeching that seems to come from everywhere, at once and nowhere in particular. The Def Dread systems are loud, far louder than the volunteer could have imagined. Every movement of the hydraulics produces a grinding shriek. Every cycle of the engine creates a thunderous rattle. Every mechanical component seems designed to generate the maximum possible amount of sound, all of it trapped inside the metal shell and reflected back onto the pilot from every surface. The volunteer tries to cover his ears, an instinctive response to overwhelming noise, and discovers his first horrible truth. He cannot move. His arms do not respond to his commands, or rather, they do respond, but not in the way he expects. When he tries to lift his arm to his head, the Def Dread's massive weapon arm lurches upward, smashing against the ceiling of whatever structure contains it, and creating an even louder crash that makes his skull vibrate. Panic sets in. The volunteer tries to move again, tries to stand up, tries to run, tries to do anything that might allow him to escape the deafening noise. But his body is restrained, held in place by the metal coffin that surrounds him. He cannot see properly. Where his eyes should show him his hands, his chest, the world around him as he has always seen it, there is instead a narrow slit of vision provided by the deaf dread's optical sensors. The view is wrong, the perspective all wrong, everything too high and at the wrong angle. He tries to turn his head and discovers another horror. His head is locked in place, held by the cranial jacks and restraints. He cannot look down at his body. He cannot turn to see what is happening around him. The only vision available to him is what the deaf dread's sensors provide, and those sensors show him the world from a height he has never experienced, through a narrow viewport that captures only a fraction of what his natural eyes could see. The temperature is wrong. Inside the sarcophagus, the air is hot, far hotter than comfortable. The deaf dread's engine generates tremendous heat, and the cooling systems are barely adequate to prevent the pilot from cooking alive. Sweat forms on skin that can no longer be wiped away. It runs down his face, into his eyes. But he cannot blink it away effectively, because even that basic function has been disrupted by the cranial jacks interfering with his motor control. He tries to breathe and finds that even this most basic function has been stolen from him. The breathing apparatus forces air into his lungs on a schedule it determines, not when he needs it. Sometimes it pushes air in when he is trying to exhale, creating a choking sensation. Sometimes it waits too long between cycles, making him feel like he is suffocating. The rhythm is wrong, mechanical and inflexible, and his body rebels against it even as it keeps him alive. The volunteer can feel the tubes inside him. Every single one of them is a point of foreign intrusion, a place where his body has been penetrated and violated. The nutrient feeds burn as they deliver sustenance. The waste elimination tubes create sensations he tries not to think about. The neural connections send confusing signals, creating phantom sensations of touch where no touch exists and blocking sensation where there should be feeling. He tries to speak, tries to call for help, tries to demand that the pain boy let him out and fix whatever has gone wrong. His voice emerges as a mechanical rasp, filtered through vox speakers that turn his orcish growl into something that barely sounds like language. The words are there, but the voice is wrong, and he barely recognizes it as his own. He sounds like a broken piece of machinery, not like an orc. Every attempt to move produces unexpected results. He wants to take a step forward, and the deaf dread lurches violently, nearly toppling over before gyroscopic stabilizers catch it. He wants to reach out and touch something, and a massive weapon arm swings wide, crashing into whatever happens to be nearby. The disconnect between intention and action is overwhelming. His brain sends signals based on a lifetime of controlling an orc body, but those signals now control a machine that responds in completely different ways. The volunteer feels claustrophobic in a way orcs rarely experience. He is trapped in a space barely larger than his body, unable to move, unable to escape. Sealed inside metal walls that press in from every direction. There is no room to stretch, no room to adjust position. No way to relieve the growing discomfort of being held in one position with no possibility of change. Every minor itch becomes torture because it cannot be scratched. Every uncomfortable pressure point becomes agony because position cannot be shifted. And then there is the sensory deprivation. Orcs are creatures of physical sensation. They feel the wind on their skin, the weight of weapons in their hands, the impact of their boots on solid ground. They smell the battlefield, the cordite and blood and engine exhaust. They taste the fungus beer and the roasted squig and their own blood when they take a good hit. All of this has been stripped away. The volunteer is cut off from direct physical contact with the world, experiencing everything through mechanical intermediaries that filter and translate and distort. He cannot feel the ground beneath his feet because he has no feet anymore, only the deaf dread's piston-driven legs. He cannot feel the weight of weapons in his hands because he has no hands, only weapon mounts that respond with agonizing slowness to his attempts at control. He cannot smell anything except the recycled air inside his metal coffin, tainted with the scent of his own waste and the acrid tang of the mechanical systems. He cannot taste anything because he no longer eats, only receives nutrients through tubes. The volunteer realizes, in a moment of horrible clarity, that he has made a terrible mistake. He wanted to be bigger and stronger. He wanted to have more dakka and better weapons. He wanted other orcs to look up to him with admiration and fear. And he has gotten all of those things. But the price was everything that made being an orc worthwhile. The price was his freedom, his comfort, his ability to experience the world in the direct, uncomplicated way that had always brought him joy. He tries to tell the pain boy to let him out, to reverse the process, to put him back the way he was. But the pain boy only laughs, a sound that comes through crackling speakers as distorted mockery. The mech boy explains, with the patience of an adult addressing a particularly slow child, that the deaf dread has been welded shut. The connections are permanent. There is no going back. The volunteer is now a deaf dread pilot, and he will remain a deaf dread pilot until the machine breaks down or he dies, whichever comes first. The volunteer, the now pilot, screams. But the scream emerges as nothing more than electronic static, a meaningless burst of noise that might be mistaken for a weapon malfunction. No one comes to help him. No one recognizes his distress as anything other than the normal adjustment period for a new deaf dread pilot. The other orcs gather around to admire the new machine, commenting on its weapons and armor, discussing how much damage it will do in the next battle. They do not see the trapped orc inside. They do not hear his electronic screams as pleas for release. They see only what they want to see, a magnificent instrument of destruction, ready to serve the WH40K. And the pilot realizes that this is only the beginning. This is not a temporary situation that will end when the battle is over. This is his life now, forever, for however long the deaf dread continues to function. This metal coffin is his entire world, and he will never leave it. He will never again feel grass beneath his feet or wind on his face. He will never again enjoy a proper fight with a chopper in his hand. He will never again experience the simple joy of being an orc. He has traded all of that for power, and only now does he understand what an unfair trade it was. The loss of orkiness. What has been stripped away. To understand what the deaf dread pilot has lost, we must return to the fundamental nature of what it means to be an orc. An orc is, above all else, a physical creature. His joy comes from direct, uncomplicated interaction with the world around him. He swings his chopper and feels it bite into flesh. He fires his slugger and feels the recoil. He charges into combat and feels the impact of bodies colliding. Every aspect of orc existence is grounded in immediate, visceral experience. The deaf dread pilot has been cut off from all of this. He no longer has a body in any meaningful sense. What remains of his physical form is a mutilated collection of organs kept alive by machines, restrained and penetrated and modified beyond recognition. He cannot move this body. He cannot use it to interact with the world. It serves only as a biological component of the deaf dread systems, no more capable of independent action than the engine or weapons. Consider something as simple as walking. An orc takes pride in his stride. The way he walks communicates his status to other orcs. A big orc walks with confidence, taking up space, making the ground shake with each step. A smaller orc walks carefully, ready to dodge if a bigger orc takes offense at his presence. But every orc walks, and every orc feels his body moving through space, feels his muscles working, feels the satisfying impact of his feet on whatever surface he is crossing. The deaf dread pilot no longer walks. The machine walks, or more accurately, it stomps and lurches. Each step requires conscious effort to control hydraulics that respond with agonizing slowness to mental commands. There is no natural rhythm to it, no unconscious grace. Every movement must be thought about, commanded, monitored, and even then it often goes wrong. The pilot does not feel his body moving. He feels hydraulics whining and gears grinding, and metal flexing under stress. The connection between intention and action has been severed and replaced with something awkward and unnatural. Or consider fighting, which is supposed to be the great joy of orcish existence. A proper orc fight is a full body experience. The orc feels the weight of his weapon, adjusts his grip, swings with his whole body behind the blow. He feels the impact, feels whether he connected well or poorly, feels the resistance of whatever he is hitting. He dodges incoming attacks by moving his body, by twisting and weaving and using his natural agility. He roars with joy when he lands a good hit and with frustration when he misses. Everything about fighting involves the orc's whole being. The Def Dread pilot fights very differently. He points weapon arms at targets and activates firing mechanisms. He sees explosions through optical sensors, but does not feel the satisfying recoil. He crushes enemies with power claws, but does not feel the impact in his hands because he has no hands. The kills rack up, the body count rises, but there is no joy in it because the physical component has been removed. He is not fighting. The Def Dread is fighting, and he is merely a brain trapped inside, sending commands that the machine may or may not execute properly. The social aspect of being an orc has also been compromised. Orcs communicate through more than just words. They communicate through posture, through physical dominance, through the thousand subtle cues that come from having a body and being around other beings with bodies. An orc establishes his position in the hierarchy through physical presence as much as through verbal assertion. He gets up in another orc's face, uses his size and strength to make his point, backs down from bigger orcs when necessary. The Def Dread pilot cannot do any of this. He towers over other orcs now, which should be good, but the height is wrong. Other orcs do not see him as a big orc. They see him as a machine with an orc trapped inside. The respect they show is not the respect given to a proper warboss or nob. It is the respect given to a weapon, dangerous but not truly part of the social order. The pilot cannot participate in the casual violence that establishes and maintains orcish social bonds. He cannot give another orc a good thump to settle an argument. He cannot wrestle for fun. He is isolated, separated from his fellow orcs by the metal shell that makes him powerful but alien. Even eating and drinking, simple pleasures that require no special skill, have been stolen from him. An orc enjoys his food. He bites into roasted squig and tastes the charred meat. He guzzles fungus beer and feels it burn down his throat. He belches enormously and laughs about it. Eating is a social activity as well as a biological necessity. Orcs eat together, fighting over the best bits, stealing food from weaker orcs, sharing with their mates when the mood strikes them. The Def Dread pilot receives nutrients through tubes. He does not taste anything. He does not chew. He does not experience the satisfaction of a full belly or the pleasant fuzziness that comes from drinking too much fungus beer. The nutrient solution keeps him alive, but provides no enjoyment whatsoever. He cannot even get properly drunk, as the life support systems filter his blood and remove any substances that might impair his function as a weapon platform. Sleep, that basic necessity, has been transformed from a natural process into another source of discomfort. An orc sleeps when he is tired and wakes when he is rested. He finds a comfortable spot, lies down, and lets his exhausted body recover. He might dream, he might not, but the process is natural and refreshing. The Def Dread pilot cannot lie down. He cannot find a comfortable position. He remains locked in the same position, whether conscious or unconscious. The life support systems keep him in a state of minimal consciousness when not in battle, a grey twilight existence that is neither true sleep nor true wakefulness. He drifts, aware of discomfort but unable to address it, waiting for the next time he will be activated for combat. Perhaps most cruel of all is what has been done to the pilot's ability to grow. Orcs grow throughout their lives, getting bigger and stronger with each victory. This growth is both physical and social. An orc who proves himself in battle grows larger, which brings respect, which leads to more opportunities for combat, which leads to more growth. It is a positive feedback loop that can take an orc from a simple boy to a mighty warboss, given enough time and luck. The Def Dread pilot will never grow again. His body is locked inside the sarcophagus, restrained and modified and sealed away. Even if his biological form tried to grow, there is no room for it. The metal coffin is exactly the size it will always be. The pilot's size is now defined by the Def Dread, and the Def Dread does not grow. It can be modified, have weapons upgraded or armor added, but these changes are made by mech boys, not earned by the pilot through his own prowess. The pilot is permanently frozen at whatever status he achieved before being interred, unable to progress, unable to become more than he is. This inability to grow extends beyond the physical, and Orc's understanding of the world expands as he experiences more of it. He learns through doing, through fighting different enemies, through trying new weapons, through traveling to new places. The Def Dread pilot's ability to learn and grow has been severely limited. He cannot try new weapons because he is permanently equipped with whatever the mech boy installed. He cannot travel freely because he must be transported in specially modified vehicles. He cannot even choose his own battles because the Def Dread is too valuable to risk on casual skirmishes. The pilot has been reduced from a complete Orc, with all the potential that implies, to a specialized component of a war machine. His entire existence has narrowed to a single purpose, operating the Def Dread in combat. Everything else, all the things that made being an Orc worthwhile, has been cut away. And this loss of Orciness is not just a matter of being unable to do certain things. It affects the pilot on a fundamental level that other species might struggle to understand. Orcs exist in connection with the WH field, drawing from it and contributing to it. Their happiness and enthusiasm feed the field, and the field in turn amplifies their natural abilities. An Orc surrounded by other Orcs feels this connection viscerally, feels himself part of something greater, feels the collective energy of the WH flowing through him. The Def Dread pilot still touches the WH field, but the connection is attenuated, filtered through the machine that imprisons him. He is no longer fully part of the collective. The other Orcs do not see him as one of themselves. They see the machine, and their WH energy goes into making the machine work rather than supporting the Orc inside it. The pilot becomes a tool of the WH rather than a participant in it, and this subtle shift is another layer of isolation. Another way in which he has been separated from everything that makes an Orc's life meaningful. What the pilot has lost, in summary, is everything that made him happy. He cannot fight in the way that brings joy. He cannot move freely. He cannot eat or drink or sleep properly. He cannot grow or progress or become more than he is. He cannot participate in Orc society as a real member. He cannot feel the simple pleasures of having a body and using it to interact with the world. He has gained power, certainly. The Def Dread is formidable in combat, but power without joy is meaningless to an Orc, and joy is precisely what the pilot no longer has and will never have again. Running in. The madness sets in. After the initial awakening comes a period that other Orcs call run-in, though the term hardly captures the full horror of what occurs. The phrase suggests a mechanical process, like breaking in new boots or wearing down rough edges. In reality, running in is the period during which the Def Dread pilot goes completely, violently insane. The madness does not come all at once. It builds gradually. Each moment of discomfort and frustration adding to a mounting pressure that the pilot's mind was never designed to handle. Orcs are simple creatures in many ways, evolved for direct action and immediate gratification. They are not built to endure prolonged psychological torture. They do not have the mental frameworks necessary to process existential despair. When an Orc encounters a problem, his instinct is to solve it through violence. When the problem cannot be solved through violence, when it is in fact inescapable and permanent, his mind begins to break. The pilot tries to escape at first. He throws his full mental effort into commanding the Def Dread's systems, trying to make the machine walk away from the mech boy's workshop, trying to find some way to open the sarcophagus from the inside. But the controls do not respond the way he wants. The Def Dread lurches and stumbles, crashes into walls, falls over and must be righted by teams of grots. The more he tries to control it, the worse the results become, because panic makes fine control impossible, and the neural interface requires a calmness that the pilot does not possess. When physical escape proves impossible, the pilot tries verbal escape. He screams through the Vox speakers, demanding to be let out, threatening the pain boy and mech boy with all manner of violence if they do not reverse what they have done. But his voice, filtered through mechanical systems, lacks the authority and menace of a proper orc roar. The other orcs ignore his demands or laugh at them. They think he is just being dramatic, that he will calm down once he gets used to his new body. They do not understand, or perhaps they do not care, that there will be no getting used to this, no acceptance, no peace. As the days pass and escape remains impossible, the pilot's mental state deteriorates. The constant physical discomfort becomes intolerable. The heat inside the sarcophagus makes his skin burn. The tubes penetrating his body create points of infection and irritation. The nutrient feeds upset his stomach, or what remains of his digestive system. The waste elimination tubes malfunction periodically, creating situations too humiliating and disgusting to describe in detail. The breathing apparatus sometimes gets the rhythm wrong, making him feel like he is drowning in air. The sensory deprivation compounds these physical torments. Cut off from normal sensation, the pilot's mind begins to hallucinate, trying to fill in the gaps with imagined inputs. He feels phantom limbs that do not exist. Tries to move arms and legs that were cut away during surgery. He sees things in the corner of his restricted vision that turn out to be artifacts of the optical sensors. He hears voices in the mechanical whine, words in the grinding of gears. Reality becomes unstable, hard to distinguish from delusion. Sleep deprivation adds another layer of madness. The pilot cannot achieve true rest. The life support systems keep him in a state of low awareness, even when he tries to sleep, monitoring his vital signs, adjusting nutrient flows, keeping him alive but never allowing him to fully disconnect. When he does lose consciousness, it is more like passing out than sleeping, and he wakes feeling more exhausted than before. The cumulative effect of days without proper sleep leaves his mind vulnerable to paranoia and irrational thoughts. During this period, the pilot becomes convinced of various impossible things. He believes the pain boy has made a mistake, that this situation is temporary, that he will be let out soon and everything will return to normal. He believes he can control the death dread better if he just tries harder, if he concentrates more, if he wishes hard enough. He believes the other orcs are conspiring against him, that they trapped him in this machine deliberately to torture him. His beliefs shift from moment to moment, contradicting each other, making no logical sense, but each one feels absolutely true while he holds it. And then, at some unpredictable point, something inside the pilot snaps. All the accumulated frustration, all the pain, all the despair transforms into pure, undirected rage. The running-in period reaches its crisis, and the death-dread pilot becomes a danger to everything around him. The pilot no longer tries to escape or reason or understand. He simply wants to destroy. He wants to hurt something, anything as badly as he has been hurt. He wants to make the world pay for what has been done to him. And suddenly, all the clumsy controls that baffled him before become easy to use, because he is no longer trying for precision. He is just trying to make things die. The death dread lurches into motion with a speed that surprises everyone, including the pilot. Weapon systems that refuse to respond properly now fire in sustained bursts, tearing through whatever happens to be in front of them. Power claws that moved sluggishly before now snap shut with bone, crushing force on the first thing they encounter. The pilot is running in, and blood is about to flow. Most pain boys and mech boys who work on death dreads are experienced enough to anticipate this moment. They have installed remote kill switches that can shut down the machine if things get out of hand. They have reinforced their workshops to withstand a rampage. They have established clear retreat routes for the grots and themselves. But even with these precautions, the running-in period claims casualties. The pilot attacks without strategy or target selection. He kills whoever is closest, whatever his weapons can reach. If there are Gretchen nearby, they die first, crushed under massive feet or torn apart by gunfire. If there are orcs who have come to observe the new death dread, they discover too late that admiration does not protect against indiscriminate violence. The pilot might kill dozens before he can be contained. before the kill switch is activated or enough orcs dogpile the machine to restrain it. The other orcs find this entire spectacle hilarious. They watch from safe distances as the new Death Dread pilot loses his mind and murders everyone within reach. They place bets on how many he will kill before being stopped. They laugh at the grots trying to flee and the unlucky orcs who did not retreat fast enough. This is prime entertainment, a violent festival that perfectly captures the orcish appreciation for bloodshed and chaos. The only orcs who do not find it funny are the ones currently being killed, and even some of them might appreciate the absurdity if they had time to think about it. When the rampage finally ends, either through kill switch activation or simple exhaustion of targets, the pilot slumps in his restraints, spent and trembling. The rage that drove him dissipates, leaving only the same misery he started with. Nothing has improved. He is still trapped. He is still suffering. But now he has murdered his fellow orcs. And if he were capable of guilt, he might feel it. Instead, he feels a terrible understanding. This is his life now. Periods of agonizing boredom and discomfort punctuated by moments of violent rage. He will never escape. He will never be free. The only release he will ever know is the brief catharsis of slaughter, and even that is hollow because he cannot truly feel it through the mechanical intermediaries. The running-in period serves a purpose, though not one that brings any comfort to the pilot. It teaches him what his life has become. It shows him that resistance is futile, that escape is impossible, that the only thing he can do is endure and occasionally channel his misery into killing the enemies of his clan. The madness becomes permanent, a constant companion that will accompany him for however long the Death Dread continues to function. Other orcs watch the running-in and make mental notes. They think twice about volunteering for the next Death Dread that gets built. But orcish memory is short, and the desire for power is strong, so there will always be more volunteers. The cycle continues, each new pilot discovering the same terrible truth that every pilot before him discovered. The Death Dread is a trap that looks like a gift, and once you are inside, there is no way out. The pilot who has finished running in is forever changed. He is no longer an orc in any meaningful sense. He is a weapon that can think, a walking nightmare that happens to retain some fragment of orcish consciousness. His days of joy are over. His existence has narrowed to a single repeating pattern: suffer, rage, kill, suffer again. And the worst part, the truly unbearable part, is that this is not a temporary condition. This is forever, or at least, it will last until either the pilot dies or the Death Dread breaks down completely. Whichever comes first will be a mercy, but neither comes quickly. The pilot's enhanced life support systems keep him alive far longer than natural orc physiology would allow. The Death Dread's construction, while crude, is surprisingly durable. Both pilot and machine can persist for years, even decades, grinding away at existence with no hope of improvement or change. The tedium of existence after the running-in period, after the rage has been spent, and the madness has settled into something almost manageable, the Death Dread pilot enters what will be the majority of his existence. It is not combat. It is not adventure. It is not the glorious service that was promised when he volunteered. It is waiting. Death Dreads are expensive to build and maintain. They require the combined expertise of pain boys and mech boys. They consume resources that could be used for other war machines or to equip more boys. Because of this expense, war bosses who possess Death Dreads use them sparingly, deploying them only for battles significant enough to justify the risk and resource expenditure. This means the vast majority of a Death Dread pilot's existence is spent not in combat but in storage, waiting for the next time he will be needed. The storage facilities for Death Dreads vary depending on the clan and resources available. Some war bosses maintain dedicated hangars for their war machines. Others simply leave them standing in the corner of a larger workshop or storage area. The specific location does not matter much to the pilot because his experience is the same regardless. He stands, locked in position, unable to move, unable to see much through his limited vision port, unable to do anything except exist and endure. Time becomes meaningless in this state. without the normal cues of day and night, without the ability to move or engage in activity, without social interaction or external stimulation, the pilot loses track of how long he has been standing in darkness. Hours feel like days. Days feel like years. The only way he can mark time is by the slow accumulation of minor changes in his environment, or by the scheduled maintenance visits from grots, who occasionally service the Def Dread systems. These maintenance visits provide brief moments of contact with the outside world, but they are not pleasant. The grots crawl over the Def Dread's exterior, hammering and tightening and replacing components. They do not speak to the pilot. They do not acknowledge his existence, except as another component to be maintained. If something requires internal access, they might open a panel and work near the sarcophagus, and the pilot can hear them chittering to each other in their high-pitched voices, but they do not address him directly. The pilot tries to communicate during these visits. He uses the Vox speakers to ask questions, to beg for information about when he will be deployed again, to request that someone, anyone, speak with him. The grots usually ignore him. Sometimes they respond with mockery, making jokes about the trapped orc, laughing at his predicament. The grots remember that orcs are bigger and meaner, that they kick grots around and treat them as disposable labor. Now one of those big orcs is trapped in a can, helpless, and the grots find this deeply amusing. Between maintenance visits, there is nothing. The pilot exists in a sensory desert, fed minimal input, locked in position, counting the seconds in the only way available to him, by listening to the rhythmic wheeze of his breathing apparatus. He cannot sleep properly. He cannot exercise to pass time. He cannot even think clearly because the combination of isolation and physical discomfort makes concentration nearly impossible. His mind wanders in disturbing directions. He remembers what it was like to be a proper orc, to run across battlefields with a chopper in hand, to feel the satisfaction of a good fight. But these memories are torture because they highlight everything he has lost. The contrast between what he was and what he has become is too painful to contemplate for long. Yet he cannot stop himself from remembering. The memories are all he has. He fantasizes about the next battle. This becomes his primary mental occupation, imagining scenarios where he will be deployed, where he will finally get to fight again. But even these fantasies are hollow, because he knows from experience that battle in the Def Dread is nothing like real combat. It provides a brief distraction from the tedium, a few moments where his existence has purpose, but it does not bring joy. Nothing brings joy anymore. Sometimes the pilot hears sounds from outside his metal prison. Other orcs moving through the storage area, working on different projects, arguing and fighting, and conducting the business of being orcs. He hears their voices and feels a longing so intense, it is almost physical. He wants to be out there with them. He wants to participate in their simple, uncomplicated existence. He wants to throw a punch, share a drink, tell a joke, do any of the 1,000 small things that make up orcish social life. But he is sealed away, unable to join them, able only to listen and imagine and suffer. The isolation does strange things to his perception. The pilot begins to lose his sense of self, without a body to maintain. Without regular interaction with others, without the constant stream of sensory input that normally defines consciousness, his identity starts to fragment. He forgets what he looked like before the surgery. He forgets what his original voice sounded like before it was replaced with electronic rasping. He forgets his name sometimes, though orcs do not put much stock in names anyway. He starts to think of himself as the Def Dread, rather than as an orc trapped inside the Def Dread. This is not acceptance or adaptation. This is dissociation, a psychological defense mechanism that allows him to maintain some semblance of sanity by pretending he chose this existence, that he is the machine rather than a prisoner of the machine. But the dissociation is incomplete and unstable. Reality keeps breaking through, reminding him that he is still just an orc, still trapped, still suffering. The life support systems that keep the pilot alive during these long periods of inactivity are another source of constant discomfort. They are designed for functionality, not comfort. The The nutrient feeds deliver exactly what the pilot needs to survive, but no more. He experiences perpetual low-level hunger. The feeling that he has eaten just enough to not starve, but never enough to feel satisfied. The waste elimination tubes function, but they function imperfectly, creating situations of profound indignity that the pilot must simply endure because there is no alternative. Temperature regulation remains a persistent problem. The Def Dread's interior is always too hot or too cold, never comfortable. When the systems are inactive, the metal shell becomes cold, leaching heat from the pilot's body until he shivers despite the blankets of cables and tubes that surround him. When the systems activate, even briefly, the heat becomes oppressive, making him sweat until his skin is slick, and the air inside the sarcophagus becomes thick and foul. Pain is another constant companion. The neural interfaces hurt, the tubes hurt. The restraints create pressure points that develop into sores. The sores become infected. The infections are treated by automated medical systems that deliver antibiotics through the same tubes that feed him. But the treatment is imperfect, and the infections recur. The pilot exists in a state of chronic pain that has no relief, no end, no variation except in intensity. And through all of this, the worst aspect is the knowledge that nothing will change. This is not a temporary situation he must endure until conditions improve. This is his life now, permanently. The next deployment might come tomorrow, or might come months from now, but it will not improve his situation. It will only provide a brief break from the tedium before he returns to storage to wait again. Some pilots go completely mad during these periods. They retreat so far into their own minds that they stop responding to external stimuli entirely. When these Def Dreads are deployed, they simply stand motionless on the battlefield, unable or unwilling to fight. The mech boys usually scrap these units, prying open the sarcophagus to find the pilot's corpse or near corpse, the biological component having failed while the machine remained functional. Other pilots develop elaborate internal worlds, creating fantasies they inhabit during the long waiting periods. They imagine they are somewhere else, someone else, living a different life. These fantasies can become so detailed and convincing that when the pilot is finally activated for combat, he initially does not understand where he is or what is happening. The transition from fantasy to reality is jarring and painful, another reminder that his true existence is the nightmare, not the dream. The only thing that prevents complete psychological collapse is the knowledge, dim and distant though it may be, that eventually there will be another battle. However terrible combat in the Def Dread might be, it is better than this endless waiting. It provides purpose, however temporary. It provides stimulus, however filtered through mechanical systems. It provides something, anything, to break the monotony. So the pilot waits, and waits, and waits, locked in darkness, locked in silence, locked in a prison of metal and his own deteriorating mind, counting seconds that blend into minutes, that blur into hours, that stretch into days, that expand into weeks or months or possibly years. Waiting for the next deployment, the next battle, the next few moments of purpose before returning to the void. This is the reality of a Def Dread pilot's existence. Not glory, not power, not service to the WH. Just waiting in the dark, trapped and alone, suffering without purpose or end. Battle the brief escape when the call finally comes. When the warbus decides to deploy his Def Dreads, it should be a moment of relief for the pilot. After the endless waiting, after the sensory deprivation and isolation and crushing boredom, here at last is action. Here is purpose. Here is the chance to do what the Def Dread was built for, to unleash violence on the enemies of the clan, to participate however distantly in the WH. But relief is not what the pilot feels. What he feels is closer to panic mixed with desperate hunger, like a starving creature presented with food it cannot properly digest. The activation sequence begins, systems coming online one by one, and the pilot's consciousness sharpens from the dim twilight of storage mode into something approaching alertness. The mechanical sounds that had faded into background noise become deafening again. The heat that he had learned to tolerate becomes oppressive. The interface between his mind and the machine reasserts itself. and he remembers all over again how wrong it feels to send commands through neural jacks instead of through muscle and nerve. The Deaf Dread is transported to the battlefield, usually loaded onto a flatbed truck or carried by a larger war machine. The pilot cannot see the journey properly, only glimpses through his restricted vision port. He hears the sounds of preparation around him, the roar of engines, and the chatter of orc voices raised in anticipation. Other orcs are excited about the coming battle. They look forward to the violence with uncomplicated joy. The pilot should share this excitement, but he cannot. The prospect of combat fills him not with joy, but with grim determination to get through it, to perform his function, to justify his miserable existence. When the Deaf Dread is finally deployed, positioned on the battlefield, and released from its transport restraints, the pilot takes his first steps in however long it has been since the last battle. The controls are still difficult, still unintuitive, still requiring mental effort that should not be necessary. But at least he is moving, at least he has a purpose, at least the terrible waiting is temporarily over. The battle begins, and the pilot engages. He points his weapons at targets designated by his limited vision and pulls metaphorical triggers that activate firing mechanisms. Shells and bullets and energy blasts scream out from the Deaf Dread's weapons, tearing into enemy positions. The recoil, filtered through tons of metal and hydraulics, reaches him as nothing more than a faint vibration. There is no satisfaction in it. There is no joy. There is only the mechanical observation that weapons have been fired and enemies have been destroyed. The pilot tries to lose himself in combat, tries to find some echo of the joy that fighting used to bring. He pushes the Deaf Dread forward, crushing enemies beneath its feet, swinging weapon arms in wide arcs that send broken bodies flying. The body count rises. The Deaf Dread's armor takes hits, deflecting them or absorbing them, protecting the pilot inside from harm. By any objective measure, he is winning, he is effective, he is doing exactly what a Deaf Dread should do. But subjectively, from the pilot's perspective trapped inside the machine, it feels hollow. He cannot feel the impact of his blows. He cannot hear the satisfying crunch of bodies breaking. He cannot smell the blood, or the cordite, or the terror of his enemies. Everything is filtered through mechanical sensors that translate reality into mere data. He is not fighting so much as observing fighting happen through a very narrow window. The other orcs around him are having the time of their lives. They charge forward with wild abandon, roaring their joy, swinging their weapons with uncomplicated enthusiasm. They are doing exactly what they were born to do, and it shows in every aspect of their behavior. They dodge and weave and fight with their whole bodies. They work together instinctively, supporting each other without need for complex commands. They are, in short, being orcs, and they are magnificent. The pilot watches them and feels something that might be envy or might be grief. He used to be like that. He used to fight with that same uncomplicated joy. But that was before, when he had a body that responded naturally to his will, when fighting was a full sensory experience rather than a series of mechanical operations. He has been separated from the very thing that makes orcish existence worthwhile, and no amount of firepower or armor can compensate for that loss. Sometimes during battle, the pilot's attention drifts. He becomes distracted by the wrongness of his situation, by the disconnect between what he is doing and what he is experiencing. When this happens, the Deaf Dread's responses become sluggish or erratic. He misses shots he should make. He moves in directions he did not intend. The machine's effectiveness drops, and if the battle is close, this could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Other times, the pilot's buried rage resurfaces. He stops trying for precision or tactical awareness and simply destroys everything in front of him. This can be effective against certain enemies, the sheer volume of firepower overwhelming their defenses. But it can also be wasteful, burning through ammunition that could be better used, or worse. It can result in friendly casualties as the Deaf Dread's weapons cut down orcs who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The warboss and other commanders learn to account for this unpredictability. They position death dreads where indiscriminate violence is actually useful, where the goal is simply to destroy everything in a given area, rather than to achieve specific tactical objectives. They support the death dreads with regular boys, who can handle the more delicate aspects of combat. They treat the machines as mobile artillery, rather than as infantry, acknowledging that while powerful, they are not precise instruments. The pilot is aware of this tactical reality, aware that he has become a blunt instrument in situations that might call for finesse. Part of him does not care, is simply grateful to be deployed at all, rather than rotting in storage. But another part, the part that remembers being a proper orc, feels diminished by this reduction in status. He went from being a complete warrior to being a component of a larger war machine, valued for his firepower, but not for his skill or cunning. When the battle reaches its peak, when the fighting is thickest and the violence most intense, something strange sometimes happens. The pilot, despite all his suffering and despite the mechanical barriers between him and reality, occasionally catches a brief glimpse of what he used to feel. The WH energy flowing through the battlefield is so intense that even his attenuated connection to it can carry some of that psychic thunder. For just a moment, he remembers what it felt like to be an orc fully engaged in glorious combat. But these moments are fleeting and make everything worse once they pass. They remind him of what he has lost more clearly than any amount of memory or imagination could. They show him that the joy still exists in the universe, that other orcs are experiencing it right now, but that it has been permanently placed beyond his reach. The brief glimpse of happiness makes his ordinary misery harder to bear, not easier, and then the battle ends. The enemy is defeated or driven off. The orcs begin the process of looting the battlefield and celebrating their victory. They sing their brutal songs and toast their success with whatever alcoholic substances they have managed to acquire. They laugh and fight amongst themselves over the best bits of salvage. They do all the things that victorious orcs do, engaging in the social rituals that make their culture what it is. The deaf dread pilot cannot participate in any of this. He stands where the battle ended, awaiting orders or retrieval, listening to the celebration but unable to join it. He cannot drink. He cannot sing. He cannot even move without expending tremendous mental effort on the clumsy controls. He is alone in his metal prison. Surrounded by celebratory orcs who have already forgotten, he is anything other than a piece of machinery. Eventually, a transport arrives to collect him. He is loaded back onto the flatbed or into the carrier, secured with restraints and moved back to storage. The journey back is worse than the journey out, because now he knows what awaits him. More waiting, more isolation, more endless hours of nothing, punctuated occasionally by grot maintenance visits and very rarely by another deployment. The pilot's stint of purpose is over. His brief escape from tedium has ended. He is going back to the darkness, back to the silence, back to the grinding monotony that represents the vast majority of his existence. The battle did not make things better. If anything, it made them worse, because it reminded him that life could be more than suffering, that joy exists somewhere in the universe, just not for him. The physical torment never ends. The psychological horror of being a deaf dread pilot is matched by the unrelenting physical torment that defines every moment of existence. The metal sarcophagus that houses the pilot's mutilated body creates an environment of perpetual discomfort that ranges from merely unpleasant to actively agonizing, depending on the system's current state and the length of time since the last maintenance. The heat is perhaps the most constant source of physical suffering. The deaf dread's engine generates tremendous amounts of thermal energy, and while cooling systems exist, they were designed by mech boys whose understanding of thermodynamics is instinctive rather than theoretical, and whose primary concern is preventing the engine from melting rather than keeping the pilot comfortable. The interior temperature of the sarcophagus fluctuates wildly, but rarely if ever reaches anything a human would consider pleasant. During standby mode, when the systems are running at minimal capacity, the metal walls leach heat from the pilot's body, creating a bone, deep chill that no amount of shivering can address. The pilot cannot move to generate warmth. He cannot pull a blanket around himself. He can only endure the cold as it seeps into his flesh, making his joints ache and his muscles cramp. But when the systems activate, even briefly, the temperature swings in the opposite direction. The engine roars to life, and within moments the interior becomes an oven. The pilot's skin breaks out in sweat that has nowhere to go, coating his body in a slick film that becomes sticky and foul as it mixes with the various fluids leaking from the tube insertion points. The air itself becomes thick and hard to breathe, loaded with heat and the smell of his own unwashed body. The breathing apparatus that forces air into the pilot's lungs is a special kind of torture. It operates on a fixed rhythm determined by machine logic rather than biological need. Sometimes this rhythm matches the pilot's requirements reasonably well. Often it does not. When the pilot is stressed or engaged in the mental effort of controlling the death dread during combat, his body demands more oxygen. But the breathing apparatus continues at its standard pace, creating a sensation of suffocating even as air continues to flow. The mechanism itself is crude, a piston-driven system that pushes air in and pulls air out with mechanical precision, but without any of the subtle adjustments that natural breathing would provide. The air quality is poor, already breathed and partially recycled, carrying the taste of metal and oil. Sometimes the filters clog, and the air becomes even worse, thick with particles that irritate the lungs and trigger coughing fits that cannot be properly completed because the breathing apparatus does not accommodate such things. The tubes that penetrate the pilot's body create their own catalogue of suffering. Every tube is a potential point of infection, a place where the sterile barrier of skin has been breached and held open by foreign material. The pilot's robust orc physiology fights these infections constantly, his immune system working overtime to prevent sepsis. But fighting infection requires energy, and the limited nutrient supply means the pilot exists in a state of perpetual low-grade sickness. The nutrient feeds themselves are another source of discomfort. The fluid they deliver is nutritionally complete, but bears no resemblance to actual food. It tastes like nothing, or worse than nothing, and creates a sensation of nausea as it is forced directly into the digestive system. The pilot never feels properly full because he never actually eats. He never feels truly hungry because nutrients are being delivered constantly. He exists in a grey zone between satiation and starvation, his body receiving exactly what it needs to survive, but never experiencing the satisfaction of a good meal. The waste elimination system is perhaps the most degrading aspect of the entire nightmare. The pilot cannot control when or how his body eliminates waste. Tubes handle these functions automatically, collecting and disposing of waste products without any input from the pilot. When these systems work properly, they are merely a source of constant awareness and discomfort. When they malfunction, as orc technology often does, the results are humiliating beyond description. The pilot might spend hours or days sitting in his own waste, unable to clean himself, unable to even signal the problem effectively to anyone who might help. The grots who perform maintenance eventually notice the malfunction, usually because of the smell, and repair it with the same casual indifference they would show to any other mechanical problem. They do not acknowledge the pilot's humiliation. They simply fix the tubes and move on, leaving the pilot to sit in filth until the next scheduled cleaning cycle, whenever that might be. The restraints that hold the pilot in position create pressure points that become exquisitely painful over time. Unable to shift his weight or adjust his position even slightly, the pilot develops sores where the restraints press against flesh. These sores progress through predictable stages: discomfort, pain, breakdown of skin, exposure of underlying tissue, infection. The automated medical systems eventually notice and deliver topical treatments, but the pressure causing the sores never goes away, so they never truly heal. They simply cycle through these stages endlessly. The neural interfaces that connect the pilot's brain to the death dread systems generate their own unique variety of pain. The metal plugs driven into his brain create constant pressure, a headache that never fades, never varies, never responds to any treatment. The signals flowing through these interfaces sometimes misfire, creating sensations that have no physical basis, phantom pains in limbs that no longer exist, burning sensations across skin that has been replaced with armor plating, itches that cannot be scratched because the body parts in question were removed during surgery. The pilot's vision, mediated entirely through the Def Dread's optical sensors, creates a different kind of discomfort. The narrow field of view creates a sense of tunnel vision, as though he is looking at the world through a pipe. The lack of depth perception makes everything appear flat and strange. The optical sensors sometimes glitch or malfunction, creating visual artifacts, flickering lights, strange colors, sudden darkness followed by blinding brightness. These visual problems contribute to a sense of vertigo and disorientation that is compounded by the disconnect between what the pilot sees and what his body tells him. His inner ear, or what remains of it after surgery, still attempts to track balance and movement. But the information it provides contradicts what the optical sensors show, creating constant spatial confusion that would make a human nauseous and makes an orc feel profoundly wrong. The sounds inside the sarcophagus are another form of torture. The mechanical whine of the life support systems creates a baseline of noise that never stops. The hydraulic systems add their own grinding and hissing. The engine contributes a deep rumble that the pilot feels as much as hears, vibrating through the metal shell and into his bones. These sounds blend into a cacophony that makes concentration difficult and sleep nearly impossible. But worse than the constant noise is the lack of normal sound. The pilot cannot hear his own heartbeat, his own breathing in the natural way. These vital signs are hidden beneath the mechanical sounds, making him feel disconnected from his own body. He cannot hear environmental sounds clearly. Everything filtered through the Def Dread's audio sensors and translated into electronic approximations. The rich tapestry of sound that normally helps orient a creature in space and time has been reduced to mechanical information, further severing his connection to reality. The cumulative effect of all these physical torments is a state of existence that cannot properly be called living. The pilot does not sleep well, does not eat well, cannot move, cannot escape from pain or discomfort even momentarily. His body is kept alive by machines that have no concern for his comfort, only for his continued function as a component of the Def Dread. He is, in the most literal sense, a brain in a jar. Though the jar happens to be a massive combat walker, and the brain remains attached to just enough body to keep it functioning. And this physical suffering will continue for as long as the pilot survives. There is no recovery period. There is no healing. There is only the same constellation of discomforts and pains, day after day, year after year. However long the Def Dread continues to operate, and the life support systems continue to function, the pilot's body will slowly deteriorate despite the best efforts of the medical systems. But it will deteriorate slowly enough that he might remain conscious and suffering for decades. Why it's worse than a Space Marine Dreadnought, at first glance. The fate of a Def Dread pilot might seem similar to that of a Space Marine interred in a Dreadnought. Both involve placing a grievously wounded warrior inside a walking combat chassis where they can continue to serve despite their injuries. Both require extensive surgery and permanent modification of the pilot's body. Both result in isolation from normal existence, trapped inside metal shells that limit interaction with the outside world. But the similarities are superficial. The reality of what happens to an orc differs from what happens to a Space Marine in ways that make the orcish version infinitely more cruel. A Space Marine chosen for Dreadnought interment is, by definition, a warrior of exceptional skill and proven valor. He has usually suffered injuries so catastrophic that even the advanced medical technology of the Imperium cannot save him through normal means. Dreadnought interment is presented to him as an honor, a chance to continue serving the Emperor, despite injuries that should have ended his service. He undergoes the process knowing what it entails, having been briefed by the chapter's tech marines and apothecaries, understanding that he is trading his mortal body for the chance to fight for centuries or even millennia longer. More importantly, The Space Marine has a psychological framework that allows him to accept this fate. He has been trained since childhood to embrace suffering as a path to spiritual purity. He has been indoctrinated to believe that service to the Emperor is the highest possible calling, that his individual comfort or happiness is insignificant compared to humanity's survival. He has seen other dreadnoughts in action and has been taught to revere them as living legends, heroes who sacrificed their flesh for the good of the chapter. When a Space Marine wakes in his dreadnought for the first time, he experiences many of the same physical sensations as an Orc pilot. The pain, the disorientation, the claustrophobia are all present, but his mind processes these sensations through a completely different lens. He sees his suffering as meaningful. He understands it as a form of service, a continuation of his oath to protect humanity. His faith provides context that makes the suffering bearable, or at least gives it purpose. The Orc has none of this. He volunteered not because he understood what he was getting into, but because he wanted to be bigger and have more Daka. His culture does not glorify suffering. His psychology is not structured around endurance or spiritual transcendence. He is a creature designed for joy and immediate gratification, and he has been placed in a situation that provides neither. The same experience that a Space Marine might interpret as honorable service, the Orc experiences as inexplicable torture. Furthermore, the technology and care provided to the two different warriors differs dramatically. Space Marine dreadnoughts are created by the Adeptus Mechanicus, utilizing technology that dates back to the Dark Age of technology, maintained with religious reverence and technical expertise accumulated over 10,000 years. The interment process is conducted with precise care. The life support systems are sophisticated and reliable. The neural interfaces are carefully calibrated to minimize the disconnect between the pilot's mind and the dreadnought systems. Most importantly, Space Marine dreadnoughts are designed with the pilot's comfort, at least partially, in mind. The temperature is regulated carefully. The nutrient feeds are as pleasant as such things can be. The waste elimination is discreet and reliable. The sarcophagus, while still a prison, is designed to minimize suffering during the long periods between battles. The Adeptus Mechanicus understand that a comfortable pilot is a more effective pilot, and they design accordingly. Orc Def Dreads have none of these considerations. They are built by mech boys who care only about functionality, not comfort. The neural interfaces are crude metal plugs hammered into brain tissue. The life support systems work in the sense that they keep the pilot alive, but they make no concessions to comfort or dignity. The temperature swings wildly. The nutrient feeds are barely adequate. The waste elimination malfunctions regularly. Everything about the Def Dread is designed to destroy the enemy, with the pilot's suffering considered at best an irrelevant side effect, and at worst a source of amusing entertainment. The frequency of deployment differs significantly as well. Space Marines in dreadnoughts are extremely valuable assets, but they are also deployed regularly. Most chapters maintain a rotation, where their dreadnoughts see action on a consistent basis, preventing the pilots from spending decades in isolation. Between deployments, many chapters allow their dreadnoughts to enter actual sleep, a state of suspended animation where the pilot is not conscious of the passage of time. This sleep is portrayed in Space Marine lore as both a blessing and a source of deep philosophical contemplation. The pilot drifts in darkness, occasionally visited by dreams or visions, losing his sense of time and self. When he wakes, he has lost years or decades without experiencing them, spared the suffering of waiting. Some Space Marines find this disturbing, experiencing a kind of immortality where they skip across centuries like stones across water. But even the disturbing aspect is better than remaining conscious and aware through all those years. Orc Def Dreads do not have this mercy. The life support systems keep the pilot in a state of low awareness at all times. He does not truly sleep. He cannot enter suspended animation. He experiences every moment of the waiting, every hour of the days or months or years between deployments. The tedium is not skipped or abbreviated. It is endured in full, grinding away at whatever remains of the pilot's sanity. Perhaps most significantly, Space Marine Dreadnought pilots retain a measure of dignity and social standing that deaf Dread pilots completely lose. When a Dreadnought is activated, other Space Marines treat the pilot with reverence. They seek his counsel, as the pilot has centuries of experience and wisdom. They show respect for his sacrifice. They acknowledge him as a brother, albeit one trapped in a metal shell. The pilot remains part of the chapter's social structure, valued not just as a weapon, but as a person. The Orc pilot has none of this. Other Orcs see the deaf Dread as a machine, a tool, a weapon. They do not consult the pilot for wisdom or strategy. They do not treat him as a fellow Orc worthy of respect. At best, they admire the machine's destructive capacity. At worst, they laugh at the pilot's predicament or forget entirely that there is a living being inside. The pilot has become a thing rather than a person, stripped of the social connections that give Orcish existence meaning. The psychological impact of all these differences cannot be overstated. A Space Marine Dreadnought pilot suffers, certainly. The existence is not pleasant by any reasonable standard, but the suffering has context, has meaning, has the support of faith and brotherhood, and a belief system that validates the sacrifice. The pilot can tell himself a story about his existence that makes it bearable. He is serving the Emperor, protecting humanity, continuing to fight for a cause greater than himself. The Orc pilot has no such story. His existence has no meaning beyond continuing to exist. He cannot frame his suffering as service to a higher purpose, because Orcs do not think that way. He cannot find comfort in brotherhood, because he has been cut off from the social bonds that sustain Orcish identity. He cannot even find the grim satisfaction of knowing he is feared and respected, because other Orcs barely acknowledge his personhood. He is simply trapped, suffering, waiting to die or for the machine to break down, whichever comes first. In the end, both types of pilot are trapped in walking tombs, separated from normal existence and forced to endure conditions that would break most beings. But the Space Marine has tools to cope with this existence, while the Orc has nothing. The Space Marine's suffering is refined by purpose. The Orc's suffering is pure and undiluted, a nightmare that continues without end or meaning. And that makes all the difference between a terrible fate and a truly unbearable one. Conclusion: we have explored the full horror of what it means to wake up as an Orc Dreadnought pilot. And if you have followed this journey to its end, you now understand why this fate stands out as uniquely terrible, even in a galaxy that specializes in suffering. The pilot began as a creature designed for joy, optimized for happiness through combat and social connection. He volunteered for transformation, believing he would become something greater, more powerful, more respected. Instead, he became less. He traded every single thing that made his existence worthwhile for raw destructive capability that he can barely control and cannot truly enjoy. He is now trapped in a metal coffin, in constant physical discomfort, psychologically isolated, subjected to endless tedium, broken only by brief periods of hollow violence. His entire existence has narrowed to a single repeating pattern: suffer, wait, fight without joy, return to suffering. And perhaps the cruelest aspect of all is that this was preventable. Unlike a Space Marine, who is interred to save his life after catastrophic injuries, the Orc pilot volunteered for this transformation while perfectly healthy. He chose his own doom out of ignorance and ambition, lured by the promise of power without understanding the price. By the time he realized what he had done to himself, it was far too late to undo it. The deaf Dread pilot will persist in this state for as long as the machine continues to function, which could be years or decades. The robust Orc physiology that normally allows Orcs to survive tremendous damage works against the pilot now, keeping him alive long past the point where a Kenda biology would have granted death. The crude but durable Orc engineering ensures the machine will continue operating despite breakdowns and malfunctions that would cripple more sophisticated technology. When the end finally comes, whether through the death of the pilot or the catastrophic failure of the machine, it will be a mercy. But mercy comes slowly in the grim darkness of the far future, and the pilot will endure every moment of his nightmare until it finally, blessedly concludes. This is the horror we have witnessed together. Not the horror of external threats or cosmic evils, but the horror of trading everything that makes existence worthwhile for power that brings no joy. It is a uniquely personal hell, custom designed by the pilot's own choices and the brutal realities of Orc technology. It serves as a grim reminder that sometimes the worst fates are the ones we choose for ourselves. If you found this exploration of one of Warhammer 40k's darkest corners compelling, if it gave you a new appreciation for just how deep the grimdark can go, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We delve into the lore and horror of the 41st Millennium regularly, exploring the stories behind the battles and the fates of those who fight them. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and sometimes the greatest horrors are not inflicted by the enemy, but by our own ambitions and the terrible choices they lead us to make. The Orc Def Dread pilot learned this truth too late. May his suffering serve as a warning to any who would trade their joy for power, their freedom for strength, their very essence for the promise of becoming something greater. Because sometimes becoming greater means becoming less. And sometimes the price of power is everything that made life worth living in the first place.